Good evening, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know some other people will continue to join. Thank you for logging on to our third CE for this year. And thank you, Janine Moga, for providing her time this evening with us. During the talk today, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them at the bottom of the screen at the Q&A. If anything specific to that one slide, I'll interrupt Janine and ask her to address that question. If it's more of a situational question that you're looking to have her assess at the end, we'll go over some of those. And then also at the end, we'll have a slide announcing our June topic, which will be about snake bites, and then also a poll for our July topic, which will be about nutrition, but you have an option of 4 different topics for you to pick from. Janine is a licensed clinical social worker with specialties in veterinary social work, occupational stress resilience, grief, and loss. She has a master's degree of social work from the University of Minnesota, and she's developed and led 2 veterinary social work programs at both the University of Minnesota Veterinary Medical Center and the North Carolina State University Veterinary Teaching Hospital. With over 15 years of experience working in the veterinary field, Janine has guided many veterinary professionals, including myself, to build what I like to call the communication and emotion management toolbox. Lots of situations that I've been in, I thought, what was that advice that she gave during that talk? How should I assess the situation and answer appropriately? Janine currently lives in Southeast Virginia, where she serves as a therapist and a veterinary social educator and consultant. And she holds the hat of Chief Happiness Officer for VetGirl. Thank you, Janine, for sharing your time this evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Janine will go ahead and start her presentation on conflict and crisis management, how to keep your cool and get results while others are melting down.
Thank you so much, Paige. And thank you, everybody, for joining at the end of what was undoubtedly a really long day for all of you. I think this has been an extraordinary year, one that we don't need to recap. 2020 was extraordinarily challenging in all sorts of upside down ways. And I'm sure that lots of folks are feeling pretty crispy because the demand has not let up, right? So no better time for us to review how to manage the emotional crises that tend to erupt in practice and how to do it in a way that doesn't drain us further than we already are, right? So that's what we're going to talk about this evening. And so just to get an idea of who's in the room, I'd like to get a feel for your comfort. So how comfortable are you at handling emotional emergencies? And these can be emotional emergencies with clients. This can be emotional emergencies on your team, right, with other staff. How comfortable are you in practice? Pick the best answer. Hopefully there will be some diversity of opinion. And we'll kind of see where we're starting tonight. Excellent. I'm so glad to hear everybody in the middle of the road instead of being on the polls here. So I think this is great. I think a lot of people actually are, willing to walk into emotional emergencies, even though there are 1,000 things they would rather do. And I think some people actually have a pretty good skill set, mostly because you deal with them all the time. And I'm guessing the reason why most people are here this evening is because you just need a booster shot. I think a lot of folks right now are feeling pretty tired, and the tools are probably a bit rusty and worn just from overuse and sitting out in the elements for too long. So we're going to try to reframe some of this for you. Let me see. There we go. Reframe some of these things for you in a way that I'm hoping is going to rejuvenate your practice and give you just a couple of extra skills to tuck away in the case that you need them. So my objectives tonight are fourfold. One is I want to zoom out and maybe take a cruising altitude look at the role of emotions in veterinary practice. And then I want to review with you 7 steps of de-escalating emotional crises. And I think of emotional crises as a broad umbrella. This covers everything from the client who's having a meltdown in the parking lot because you've just given really awful news. It could be someone who's screaming at your administrative staff because they can't get in, or they're tired of sitting in the parking lot for hours waiting to be seen. It could be someone who's really angry at having to have a financial conversation with you. This could be someone who feels absolutely horrible that they have inadvertently caused a really life-threatening injury to their pet, and you're having to walk them through that guilt. I think for a lot of folks, curbside has actually made things much more difficult. In some ways, it's given us a little bit of a buffer from clients, but in other ways, it's made communication really challenging. So I want to walk you through 7 steps that always work for me when I'm working with really highly emotional situations. And then I want to provide you with some short tips and tricks that I commonly use with the most frequent things that crop up in veterinary world. And then cap off with some tips for just handling ourselves and our own emotions. In fact, we're going to bookend with some of that, just to remind you of how to take care of yourselves, because I think the emotional labor that we all engage every day in the course of veterinary practice can really take a toll. It can feel extraordinarily heavy and draining. And so finding a way to also manage that while we are helping others to manage their own emotional well-being is really important. So just as a quick primer, I don't know if anyone has seen this movie. It came out quite a while ago, but it's a wonderful Pixar film called Inside Out. And it's probably one of the best research-based pictures of how emotions work in the human brain. And so when I saw this movie, I was really excited because I thought if I could have everybody watch this, we would have a better understanding of what happens when we are in an emotional spiral. So emotions are immediate and hardwired responses to things that we consider salient or important in our lives. And remember, this is subjective. So something that's going to be important to you is not going to be important to somebody else in the same way, and vice versa. But these are things that are hardwired responses, and it's top down and bottom up in the human brain, but also in your patient's brains. And so I'll invite you to just remember that a lot of the emotions that we have as human beings, we also see in some way in our patients. Okay, so these are very, very quick, and they are not something that is being necessarily ruled by that sort of neocortical process. So emotions arise from the midbrain, and they are influenced from both the top and the bottom. So neocortical is, when we've got our best tools on board. This is where we're thinking through situations, we're able to pause and reflect. This is where our language skills come in and our numeracy skills come in. This is where we've got a lot of self-control. And then the subcortical processing, this is where we've got the lizard brain, the reptilian brain. And this is where we have that fight, flight, freeze, fidget. These are all action tendency issues. And so anything that bursts out from the midbrain that is an emotion is going to direct us very, very strongly. So there are 5 core human behaviors human emotions, from which all behavior in some way is rooted. Anger, of course, anger and rage is one of them. Sadness, another one. Disgust and surprise, they tend to be paired together, although one is obviously more negative than the other. Joy and happiness, and then fear. So everything shoots off of one of these 5 spokes, okay? And if we think about it in this way, then we can also recognize that being in a crisis is an inevitable part of the human experience because we are deeply emotional creatures. We just are. And so for a crisis to happen, we need a couple of things. One is that we perceive something that's meaningful or threatening. And the second thing is that we don't have what we need in that moment to manage what is meaningful or threatening. And it doesn't mean that we don't have the tools, period. It means that in that moment, we are completely overwhelmed by what's happening, and probably not just what's happening in the moment, but also what's happening in every other part of our lives. And so in this past year, when I'm thinking about what it has meant for all of us to be really overstretched professionally, also having to handle the pandemic and all of the stressors of the pandemic on a public scale as well as a deeply personal scale. Many folks have kids who are still at home, right, and not back in the classroom full time. We're having to deal with all sorts of fear around our own safety, and dealing with contagion in the course of just even going to the grocery store. Right? So all of these things are intensely stressful. And when our coping tools, it's emotional tools, social tools, it's cognitive tools, when our brains just don't have the bandwidth to manage everything that's coming at us, especially for clients and also for some of us as practitioners, financial issues really are part of this problem. So when we don't have what we need, our coping skills are overwhelmed, and then very quickly we see the domino effect come into play. So there's that tension and discomfort that very quickly spirals into the fight, flight, freeze, fidget of the 4 F's, that's the lizard brain, and then rapid disequilibrium, okay? So what's really important for all of us to remember is that even though emergency medicine, even though veterinary medicine is as part and parcel of your day-to-day functioning, is very familiar to you, and I'm sure especially after this last year, if you've been in practice for many years, nothing is shocking anymore. To clients, exposure to a veterinary issue, even if you think it's relatively benign or something that you can tackle, is really going to contribute to disequilibrium. Most of the time, they're not going to be coping well, especially if they've got other things going on in their lives that are making sense out of this hard for them. So remember that for most people, a crisis moment is a normal reaction to something that they consider abnormal, that they don't have exposure or practice with. Okay. And what's challenging about this is not only are we dealing with someone else's emotional crisis, but we also have an emotional response to being part of that situation ourselves. And so a lot of the things that I hear are questions around, I'm afraid I'm going to do something or say something that's going to make things worse. How do I avoid that? Are there certain things I should say and certain things I shouldn't? Fears about our own safety, right? So it's not just, am I in danger because a client is getting big and loud and angry, but over the course of the pandemic, it's clients refusing to mask, it's clients, banging on a door and refusing to leave. It's all sorts of difficult behavior that really makes us afraid for our own safety and well-being. A lot of folks are really concerned that they don't want their response in a crisis to compromise a professional relationship with the client, because you have to maintain some sort of reasonable relationship in order to successfully treat a patient. And so when that goes south, then our ability to help patients is really impaired. And then last, something that I hear frequently, especially with clients who are just really, really unglued, is, am I responsible for what this client does when they leave? So if I have a client I'm really worried about because they're threatening to hurt themselves, if I don't know what to do and I let that leave my parking lot, am I responsible for something if it really goes south? Okay, so we're going to talk about how to respond to these emotional emergencies as effectively as we can without losing our emotional grounding. So one of the ways I usually find is helpful to think about this is to just reframe for yourselves that emotions are valuable data. So there, again, is a wide range of a normal reaction to what's considered in some people's minds to be an abnormal event. Wide range. And I have to say, I've been working as a licensed social worker for 20 years, and nothing surprises me anymore. Nothing. And so people behave in a wide range of strange and interesting, complicated ways when bad things happen. And when we can remember that when people are acting up and acting out, what they're doing is telling us something that they need. That really helps us to sort of zoom out a little bit and try to consider what our options might be. So please remember that even though that amygdala, which is our reptilian brain, that is the panic center and the control center of the brain, that assists with processing, but all of us need our higher brain to be on board in order to engage full problem solving capacity and to make meaning out of difficult events. And that's how we learn. So it's not just problem solving in the moment that's important. It's being able to get through the moment and then later pause, reflect, and think, okay, what went well? What didn't go well? What do I need to do more of? What do I need to do less of? And for all of us to really develop capacity and mastery around conflict and crisis, we need to be able to get to that learning piece. And that is neocortical. Okay. So we really need to slow ourselves down. In the moment, we need to really pay excruciating attention to as much of what a client is telling us and showing us as we can. We need to connect with them in order to really develop some sort of trustworthiness in the moment that they know at least we're not trying to actively harm. And I know sometimes that is a difficult bar to clear. And then we need to reduce distress and help them to get to a place of what I call adaptive functioning. So how can I help get them through this moment so that they can make the best decision they can on behalf of that animal, so that I can get everybody safely out the door? So acute distress looks lots of different ways. Some of these are big and loud. Some of them are quiet and shrinking. None of these should be surprising to you. I think what we tend to see in veterinary practice when people are really distressed and overwhelmed is lots of distorted thinking. People can be pretty disoriented. Sometimes they can't make decisions. They get really stuck. That is cognitive overwhelm. That means all of the signals are being scrambled and they don't have the bandwidth to actually make sense out of what's going on in the moment. Okay, so that is really common. Behaviorally, sometimes we see lots of nasty stuff as well. So this is when we have not just the outbursts, and I know you are very familiar with that kind of behavior, but also people getting really hyperreactive and overreactive. And so even little things send them flying off the handle. Anything little is a surprise if they haven't been forewarned. It might be, if you can recall when we were, in the period before curbside care, people pacing in the lobby or the waiting room or pacing outside in the parking lot because they were so anxious they needed to get their body moving. Sometimes this looks like what I call impaired ADL, which is activities of daily living. And so this is when clients haven't slept, eaten, showered in days because they've been caring for a sick animal or they've been up worried about a sick animal, right? And sometimes this is avoidance. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this before, but I've certainly had clients just up and leave in the middle of a difficult conversation because they couldn't manage it. And so literally escaping was the only thing they could think of to do. Emotionally, wide range of experiences. Physically, none of this is surprising. And actually, all of us as humans experience these when we are acutely distressed as well. And so I know a lot of folks have had lots of chronic pain, probably sleep and appetite disruption, particularly in the last year, lots of restlessness and deep, deep, deep fatigue. But then spiritually, we can also have people really struggling with loss of meaning, purpose, and faith when the world is upside down. Certainly, we've heard a lot of that as well, right? So where we start, always where we start is with ourselves. In any of these moments when everybody's having a moment, when clients are really, really struggling, or you've got a member of the team who seems to be unraveling in front of you, set yourself up for success first. So the built-in pause button for your system and mine, it's free, it works. It is incredibly effective at helping us to settle ourselves and get back to our thinking brains. It is the breath. And I know that we all do it without thinking about it unless we're having trouble breathing because of allergies or we're sick or any number of other things. But using your breath intentionally is one of the best skills you can use to really get into your thinking brain and to also model it for clients. So I do this actually in exam rooms with clients all the time. I'll say, I'm going to take a deep breath right now. It might be good if you did the same. This is a really tough conversation. And then I actually count to myself. So to be truly relaxing and grounding, a breath needs to be longer on the exhale than the inhale. So my formula is in through my nose to the count of 4, and then I hold my breath for a couple of counts. It's just a long pause. And then a very slow exhale through my mouth as if I've got a straw between my lips. This is called straw breathing. And if your exhale is longer than your inhale, and you repeat this a couple of times, you will notice a shift in your body and your thinking will become clearer. So if you can feel that you are ramping as a client or a colleague ramps up, the best thing you can start with is your breath. The second thing is to move to a quiet space. And I know this is relative because veterinary hospitals are not quiet spaces. They're really loud. They are incredibly busy. But if you can even tuck away in a corner just to reduce the stimulation for yourself when you're getting ready to have a difficult conversation over the phone with a client, or when someone is being patched through to your phone because you have to give bad news, whatever it is. Try to reduce the sensory stimulation to the extent that you can. If you are seeing people in exam rooms, it is really good to put them in a room if you can, or even to get them to go outside if you have a safe space that's well lit, that gets them out of the busyness and the din of the veterinary workspace. That is sometimes a useful thing as well. So try to get to a little less stimulation if at all possible. If you're indoors and you're actually with a client, always be the one closest to the door. And this is because if you need to step out because something really goes south, you need to be the one to get there first. Okay. And this is just a tip that I was given when I was a baby social worker going into clients' homes in very difficult, dangerous situations. And it was always, the dictum of be the one who's closest to the door so that you can get to safety if you need to, so that you can get to help if you need to. And that's always a good rule. Hold your seat. So for any of you who are equestrians or have horseback riding experience, this is about really relaxing and sitting deeply and buckling up. Okay, because this is sometimes a bumpy ride when we've got someone who's really not balanced and not regulating themselves. Consider that big emotions or lack of regulation. We need to be the ones who can sit through it and model what it means to cope. We are the ones modeling those coping skills. So we have to be able to hold our seat with a little bit of confidence and really with some level of calm, composure. Focus on process, not outcome. And I know many of us are focused on outcomes because we have to be, right? We have to have decisions made in a relatively short period of time, or sometimes very, very quickly in minutes. We have to be able to proceed with treatment. We have to be able to cycle through lots and lots of cases in short order. And the challenge here is if we're focused on that outcome, we're probably missing some really important cues that we need to be able to see and hear to be able to help a client get there with us. So if we focus on the process instead, it doesn't take as long as you think to communicate really clearly and fully so we can help people to regulate and problem solve. And last but not least, super, super important, if you can, delay judgment in the moment. The acronym a colleague actually shared with me that she uses, which I love, is QTIP, which is quit taking it personally. So I know, again, humans, meaning making machines, someone gives us a dirty look as they're walking through the hall, and we can construct all sorts of stories about what's going on, what that means about us, and how everything's going to go poorly for the rest of the day, right? Our brains don't need an excuse to create a story. This is what we do. This is also what clients do. But to the extent that you can put that process on pause a little bit when you're working with something really difficult, it makes it easier to let some of the barbs go, let some of the difficult words slide off your back so that you can get to a solution, and probably faster. So try to delay that judgment. You can save it for later when you get to the end of your day, and then you can judge all you want. Okay. But try in the moment to press the pause button on that. And then from there, once we've gotten ourselves in a very quick succession to be settled and grounded and ready to roll, then I usually require or advocate for 7 steps to stop the bleeding. And we're going to walk through these each in order. The first thing we're going to do is assess safety. The second thing is establish trust and rapport. And this doesn't have to take loads and loads of time. Actually, if we choose our words carefully and we watch our tone and our body language really carefully, we can do this super quickly. Then we identify the focal problems behind the crisis. Some of those you might know, some of them you might not, so you'll have to ask. Dealing with feelings comes later. We don't ever do that first. So we want to get people into their higher brains before we let them sink into the midbrain again. Then we explore alternatives. This is solution building and problem solving, establishing a plan, and then following up so that we can keep people on track. Because when we're engaged in problem solving and de-escalating a conflict or another kind of emotional crisis, we can't guarantee that people are going to stay in that functional place once we're off the phone or we leave the room, right? People can bop back and forth to being okay to not okay very quickly. So here's Johnny. Let's talk about assessing safety. So these are the things I think about, folks. When I want to know if we have a basic level of safety from which to work, or if I have to very quickly escalate this to calling an ambulance or even law enforcement, I look for a couple of things. One, is the person congruent? So does the emotion match the situation? So if someone's laughing when their animal is coating in the back, that person's not matching. That really worries me, okay? Or it could be that they're really, really loud for something that doesn't require that kind of volume. It could be that they are really flat. And when I say flat, it means they're not giving you a lot of emotion over their face and body language. So if they're really flat when they should be falling apart, that worries me too. People who get super, super quiet when by all rights they should be howling, then I get worried. So we want to see if someone is matching, okay? If they should be angry, if you can figure out that that might be an appropriate response, then we should see some signs of that, even if it's relatively contained. Are they speaking clearly? Are they able to put words to what's happening? Or are they completely unable to put what's going on into words? Are they physically stable? Or are they hyperventilating? Are they falling on the floor? Are they having a difficult time standing up? Or are they feeling faint? So look for those things first. Emotionally, physically, cognitively, are they tracking? Is the behavior erratic or bizarre? So does it just completely not fit? I remember, this is probably 18 years ago, being paged to radiology when I was working at the University of Minnesota. And when I got there, the person sitting, the scheduler sitting behind the desk said, you need to go talk to this gentleman over on the other side because he's been eating all of the dog biscuits. And she was not really concerned about the fact that he'd eaten all the dog biscuits. She was concerned because that was really weird and he was clearly doing it for attention. And so we can tell when someone's doing something that's kind of run of the mill. It doesn't mean it's not problematic behavior. It doesn't mean we like it. But when somebody starts to behave in a way that's just completely off the charts, that's when we might have a safety issue, okay? Is there a direct threat to others? So are they saying, I am going to hurt you? Are they making a direct threat? If that is direct versus the indirect, I don't quite feel right when I'm talking to this person on the phone or when I have them in front of me, the hair on my neck stands up. That's an indirect threat. Like I have a sense that this could go poorly. And I want you to pay attention to indirect signals, but what we respond to immediately is the direct threat. Okay. And then when you have this happen, if you are concerned, see if you can get them to engage the body instead of engaging their mouths. I don't want them to talk their way through it at first. I want them to move. I want them to drink something cold. This is not when you hand someone a cup of coffee. You want to hand them ice water, direct them to the drinking fountain. We don't want to heat them up. We want to get them moving to discharge some of that agitation so that they can think more clearly. And if you have any doubts at all, call for backup. Okay, immediate threats, always call the police. If there is obviously any sort of issue that you think might be mental health related, you might not want to call law enforcement right away. You might want to call 911 and ask for an ambulance instead of law enforcement. There are lots of reasons why we have to be careful about employing law enforcement for mental health issues. Okay, but ask for help, call for help. If you think that you at least have some basic safety and can move forward, that's when you work very quickly to establish trust and rapport. And trust is, I am here to help, not hurt. And I want you to know that I hear you and see you. Rapport is having some sort of connection with a person that makes them feel like they can emotionally tell you what's happening. That's rapport. So what always helps here is to be the adult in the room. And I don't say that lightly, because I know that is really hard when we don't like and feel comfortable with conflict or crisis. It's usually the last thing we want to walk in on. But if we can assert calm control, what that does is it sends the message, I'm here, I've got this. I'm going to help you through this. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frightened. And I'm not at this moment angry, disorganized, frightened. I'm in charge. Okay. So to do this, we use our nonverbals a lot. So speaking plainly, slowly, softly, and firmly. I use simple language. I am very direct with clients when we're in the middle of an emotional spiral. And I also drop the volume and the tone of my voice. Part of this is a little bit of a trick. If I drop the volume of my voice, especially if they are loud and big, they have to work harder to hear me. And I have information they need. So keep that in mind. This is where breathing is really helpful. Take a deep breath, really settle in, then drop your volume, speak softly and clearly. Be super simple. And then I try to use what are widely considered to be calming signals for humans, although here's the deal, this is all culturally bound, and so you do have to be careful with different cultures. But most of the time, some degree of limited eye contact is really important, especially when you're first meeting somebody, looking them in the eye, really engaging them through posture and positioning. And of course, this is when you're standing in front of them. So curbside is so much harder. Doing this over the phone is really tough, and that's when you really have to depend on your tone of voice and your volume and your words. But when you've got someone in front of you, really good to use your body to sort of stand at an angle to them, be on the same level as they are, so crouch down so they feel less threatened. Make some eye contact, but don't stare. That really helps people to engage. And then ultimately talk less, listen more. Because we need to invite people to talk and to try to get into the higher brain. It can be really helpful to be directive here. And it's also really helpful to communicate the intent. And so what I usually will say, in particular, when people don't trust me, don't know why I'm here, they're highly suspicious, they just want someone to make something better, I say, I am here to help. I understand that this X is happening. I'm here to support you through this. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but I need to hear from you. And that's usually where I begin, because I'm sending the message that we're going to try to get to a solution. And then what I do is I really try to get them to zoom in on focal problems. And when people are overwhelmed, everything's a problem. But if you can prompt clients or even colleagues who are in an emotional meltdown to identify the primary issue, and then really probe for detail. And this doesn't have to take loads of time. Again, we don't want to open the Pandora's box and have them talk for 45 minutes. But what we want is to really say, help me to understand your biggest worry. Help me to understand the biggest priority in this moment. What are you most worried about? And then what do you want me to know about that? And really try to get them to focus on facts instead of how they feel. So not that they're feeling desperate, not that they're feeling furious, but tell me what happened. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you heard. Really try to get them to nail down the objective facts if you can, because that forces them into the higher brain. We want them in the neocortex in this moment, because that's how they're going to link up and regulate, okay? Sometimes part of the problem here is that people don't have enough information. So please remember, lots and lots of our clients don't have a ton of exposure to medical issues and to medical crises. They just don't. They don't speak the language you speak. So they're not going to have the same understanding. And sometimes what we need is to help fill in the blanks when they are missing facts. And so that might be one of your focal problems. So make sure you're keeping an ear to that as a potential source of issue. Okay. Once you've been able to really locate and flesh out the problem, then you can validate and normalize, because then you've got more information. So you can say, I can understand why you'd be this furious, because this doesn't feel fair that you've been waiting in the parking lot for 7 hours when your dog is really struggling in the backseat. I can totally get why you'd feel that way. That makes sense to me. And that doesn't mean that you agree with the way they're acting. It means that we're acknowledging that how they feel is understandable. Okay. So again, this is not agreement, it's validation. And validation and acknowledgement are the biggest de-escalation tools any human has. So just remember that if you can. Another thing that we can do is use open-ended questions to determine what people need in the moment to handle the feelings themselves or to help us support them in managing those feelings. So one of the phrases that I keep in my figurative back pocket all of the time is, if there's one thing that would be useful right now, what would that be? So, and then you can prompt them if they say, I have no stinking idea. I'm just so tired of having this conversation. And then you can say, well, do you need information? Do you need resources? Do you need to call somebody so you've got someone else to talk this over with? Is there anything that you think would help us get through this stuckness, this difficulty? And see if they can start to put those pieces together for you. One of the things that often people need is some sort of hope without minimizing the problem. So we don't ever want to say to someone that what they're feeling is not correct, or that we think they're blowing it out of proportion, because to them, this makes total sense, right? What we want to do is say, I know that we're having a really difficult time talking about this right now, and I can see that I'm not meeting your needs at this moment. I'm hopeful we can get to a point where that's different. And I need your help getting there. So if we can provide a little bit of a ray of light, it'll get them through the tunnel. If they really get stuck in the feelings, sometimes that means we don't have enough information and we need to rewind and go back to the focal problems. Okay. But if we can get to the feelings and say, I can totally get why you'd say this, or why you'd feel this, or why you think this. And given that you've shared that with me, let's talk about how we can get to the other side of it. So exploring solutions is really important. Usually this is when we can say, here's some things that we can offer. And I am really aware that sometimes what we have to offer is not what they want. Okay. But that's not up for grabs, because a lot of times what people will ask for is not something within the realm of possible for us. So, it's really best in this stage to be talking about the concrete issues and tasks, and to be very clear and very simple. I want to know what the client's ideas are and what their resources are as well. So if they're emotionally really overwhelmed because their animal's extraordinarily sick, they don't have the money to pay for treatment, I want to try to explore for them what the options are. And of course, I might talk about care credit and various other, financial options, but I might also say, who else do you know who's been through something like this? Do you have any resources through your social community, through your faith community? It's amazing where people can find resources if they can just get into their higher brain a little bit. So this is where we talk about, some people have tried this. I've had other clients who've done this. How do any of those sound to you? Do any of those ring true or make sense? Okay. And I think it's really important in this stage to also acknowledge that sometimes we're being forced to make choices and none of them are ideal. So it might be that you say, here's option A, option B, option C, and I know none of these are the option you want. And I know that, and I wish there was something behind option C. I wish there was a door number 4, but we've got 3 doors. One of them we need to walk through today. And even though none of these are ideal, I need to know which one you're going to be able to find some peace with. And this is where also we can offer additional support or help them brainstorm additional support. So who can you call? Who else is in your life who's familiar with how much you love your dog, or who knows what has happened or what is happening here? How can we help you sort of circle? I call that circling the wagons. How do we circle the wagons with people who love you and know you, who can help you think this through? Because sometimes that's not me. Sometimes that's not anyone on the team. Okay. And then from there, we formulate a plan. And sometimes the plan is trying to keep a client functioning. So if they have really escalated and I've managed to get them down a couple of notches, then I'll say, so here's what we've talked about. This is what we know is happening. This is what you've shared with me. This is what we've decided we're going to do now based on our conversation. And then here, based on that, is what's happening immediately next. And so here's what I'm going to do, and here's what you're going to do. Because then what we're doing is making sure we're checking for understanding. Because remember, people who are falling apart aren't processing well. Sometimes they need to hear the plan multiple times, even if they've participated in creating it. And then I always want to make sure the client can help me figure out, how do we make this workable for you? So this is what we're agreeing on, but what else needs to happen? What else can you think of that's going to make this easier for you to move forward? Sometimes I ask them to write it down or restate it for me. I know this is old fashioned and silly, but I advocate for it all the time. Have scrap paper available, especially when you move back from curbside and back into the clinical spaces with people. Have paper and writing utensils available, or have them put it on their phone. Advocate for people to have scrap paper in the car and say, I want you to take notes as we're talking. And then I'm going to check to make sure that we're both on the same page when we're all done. And then ask them to restate for you what you've agreed upon, so you can make sure that there is shared understanding and nothing has been missed. And then always encourage self-care. So these conversations are hard. These interactions are incredibly difficult. Ask them to please take care of themselves, to take a break, to get a drink of water, to go for a walk, to, while you're waiting, so long as things are stable in this moment, drive a couple blocks down, go through the drive-through. If you haven't eaten today, I need you to get some calories. It'll help you to think, help you to function, help you to do the next things we need. And this is true for ourselves as well. We have to encourage self-care for ourselves. And I know it's really difficult to do that in the moment, but it's really necessary. Okay. And then following up. So we get through it, we can take a deep breath, we proceed with what we've agreed upon. And here's the thing, when people go too long without having someone check in with them, they start to dysregulate again. And then we are probably going to have another crisis on our hands. So in order to avoid that, make sure there's also a plan for someone on the team to give a brief check-in, a text message, a quick 30-second phone call. Just want to let you know, now we've moved on to this. The doctor will call you when there's news. It doesn't mean you have to stay on the phone. And usually this is how I coach all the support staff and say, make sure you're telling people that there is a time limit on this conversation. Okay, just wanted to give you a quick update. I've got 20 seconds. Here's what's happening now, okay? And you can expect a call as soon as we have something else to share. Okay, and make sure then pivot and focus on them. Are you hanging in there? Did you get something to drink? Do you have any questions? If you have any questions, write them down. And the next time you get a phone call, the doctor will go through them with you. Okay. All right. So tips and tactics. How do we deal with the big emotions? So remember, fear or anxiety, which is sort of the little sibling of fear. These are common issues, and fear is one of the big 5 emotions. What people need when they're anxious and scared is they need to have a sense of control. We are always more fearful and anxious when we can't control or predict something. That's most of the time when you've got a client who's showing up at your clinic, okay? So what they need a sense of control and predictability. They need a reality check person. So remember, someone on dry land who's going to say, yes, this is what's happening. And then they need to focus on the present moment. So the function of fear is to try to give us some sense of being able to manage something horrible. That's why we fast forward into all sorts of awful scenarios and catastrophize. Humans are super good at this. How we get that in check is by rewinding, sort of pulling ourselves back from the brink and focusing on, what do I know? What can I do right in this moment? Okay. So then what you can do to help clients who are fearful and anxious is for you, again, to be calm and patient, to give them the message that you've got it. They can be scared if they like. You are not scared. Okay. You might be scared, but you have to manage that yourself. Set boundaries if you can, when you can. Boundaries are always a good thing. So limit the amount of time you're willing to engage this sort of fearful perseveration and catastrophizing. Ask them to limit the worry time, and actually ask them, I call it changing the channel. Prompt them or ask them to change the channel. And sometimes I do this by saying, we've just had a really difficult conversation. I know you're really, really scared about what's happening right now. I'm going to recommend that you change the channel in your brain and give yourself a little tiny bit of a break from the fear. And so how can you do that? Can you watch a funny video on your phone? Can you call a friend? This is phone a friend time. This is, again, go get a bite to eat while you're waiting. I think at this moment, we're as stable as we're going to be. It's safe for you to run down the street, and we will call you if anything requires you to run back. Okay, so this is limiting the worry time, giving people a bit of a break from their own brains. Give the anxiety a job. So this is where writing down your worries, writing down your questions is really important. You can prompt people, why don't you spend 20 minutes writing down everything you can remember about what led up to this crisis today? And then if there's anything that you have forgotten to share with me, you can share it with me the next time we talk. Okay, that's giving the anxiety a focus, and that can really help people feel in control. And then again, prescribing self-care. Take a break, take a breath, take a walk, whatever it takes. Anger, yuck. What people need, because when people are angry, they get bigger and louder when they don't feel seen and heard. This is a primary rule, not just for humans, also from a lot of your patients. They become big and loud and really reactive, quite volatile very quickly. And so what we need is to give people the message that we see and hear them. Again, doesn't mean that we understand it, doesn't mean that we agree with it, but we see it. I see you and hear you. And then we need to recognize that anger comes from a perception of threat, always. It could be that you're threatening their financial health. It could be that you're threatening because you can't heal a patient, you're threatening the bond and relationship with their patient. It could be that you're threatening their idea of who they are as a good pet parent. It could be any number of things. So we need to be able to try to reduce that sense of threat to make the anger go down. So one of the ways to do this is to be curious instead of defensive. This is really hard. This is where pausing judgment and not taking it personally is really important. So we can say things like, oh, I wonder why would you say that when someone says, you're only out for the money? I can't believe you feel like it's okay to do this. You're only doing this to take advantage of people. And then if I can make my defensive self settle a little bit, get my own hackles to drop, then I can say, gosh, I wonder why you would say that. Tell me why you think that that is true. And then you can say, and can I share with you the opposite? Actually, there's not a single person in this building who's here to try to take advantage of you, even though that might feel like it at this moment. We have all devoted our lives to helping animals and to helping their people. And it's very expensive to do that. And it's okay if you don't understand that. It's not okay to yell at me, right? So we can acknowledge what they're saying, and we can validate that this might be a really awful position to be in. And we can also set boundaries. It's okay to be upset. It's not okay to call me names. That's not going to help your pet. And in fact, it's going to get in the way. Okay. Offer concrete solution building when you can. And so this is, what is one thing that would help? And if they say, well, you need to do this at a reduced cost, or you need to do this for free, you can say, well, I can't do that. Here's what I can do. And then I always say no to this, but here are the two things you can choose from, because then I'm giving people some choice, and that gives them a sense of control. Okay. If people don't settle, if they can't regulate with their anger, it's always okay to pause and say, you know what, you're getting more upset and now I'm getting angry, and that's not going to go anywhere good. So I'd like to suggest that we take a break for 10 minutes and come back and try this again. Because I would benefit from taking a breath. And see if that doesn't help. Sometimes that sends the message, I'm not quitting on you, and you're really making me angry right now. And so we both need to settle. Okay. And I think sometimes that is a very human, appropriate thing to do. When people are overwhelmed and stuck, Really important for us to try to reduce the input and restore the functioning. Again, this is when bandwidth cannot carry the load. And overwhelm and stuckness, that can be both cognitive and emotional. Sometimes being stuck is safe. That's safer than making a choice that they might regret later. And sometimes I will mention that to clients when I'll say, gosh, it really looks to me like you don't know how to proceed and you're sitting in a quicksand. I'm wondering if that's how it feels to you. And then I'll say, can you identify what the feeling is underneath that? Sometimes people are tired, so it's a physical thing. Sometimes they're just confused. Sometimes they're really scared or they're really sad and they just don't want this to be happening. So do any of those make sense to you? Which one do you think it is? If you can, get them moving, get them eating or drinking. This is a good time to, if they're sitting in your lobby, good time to have them head to the vending machine. Or to head down the street to try to get something to eat or something to drink. It's a good thing to get them moving because actually literally moving in your body unsticks people and it helps get them back into their brain. Also focus on only what is known, not on the catastrophe, not on the million possibilities. This is where we really need to narrow the field and help them to focus on what is really critical and then make a clear recommendation and give them permission to act on it. Okay, so remember, this is especially true. We have to keep their options limited to 3 or less. The more options people have, the more overwhelmed they become, the more stuck they're likely to be. So 3 is the maximum number of choices to usually give people at any given time. Guilt. What people tend to need is to be acknowledged, affirmed, and restored. Guilt is anger turned inward. I am angry at what has happened and it is mine. And that might make total sense, right? It might be the client who left their dog in the car for too long on a hot day when they thought they were just going to run in and pick up a prescription and the line was long and they thought their pet would be okay and they weren't. It could be any number of really awful things that happen. People don't usually intend for horrible things to happen to their loved ones, and yet awful things do all of the time. Okay, so when people are sitting with that anger that they're turning on themselves, it's really important to try to remediate that harm, give them a tool to try to turn that around a little bit. We never want to tell them that it's not necessary, not appropriate, not true. Because when I tell someone to not feel guilty, that's not going to hit the mark because they're going to. So what I need to do is validate it and say, I can completely understand why you'd be really angry at yourself right now and questioning everything you've ever done. And it's really easy when you're in that moment to forget the thousands of good, loving, wonderful caregiving moments you've had with your pet. So please don't forget those things. And with that said, let's focus on what we can do because now you are here. Now you are here. Let's figure out what needs to happen. Okay, so try to get them to pivot if you can. Sadness. You all know how to deal with sadness because you deal with it every single day. Remember what people need is to be validated in it. They need to stay connected to the one they're about to lose or have lost. And they need to release the hope. And that is the hardest thing for veterinary teams to do, is to help people to release the hope that this is going to magically get better. So these are all things you already do, is listening, answering lots of questions, giving a clear recommendation, recognizing that some people just won't follow it, but that's okay. You still need to give it. And I know a lot of times people are hesitant to give a clear recommendation, particularly around euthanasia. Often they'll say it wouldn't be the wrong choice at this time, although it might not be the choice you want. And then clients often come back with, well, what would you do if it was your pet? And then quite frankly, I know that the way we answer that is highly nuanced and personal. And you'll have to walk through that on your own in a way that you feel is congruent with who you are as a professional. Everyone's going to have a different answer to that, but try to be clear, flexible, and try to be a collaborative problem solver when we're dealing with loss. Really validate and engage the story if you can. Never a bad thing to refer to outside resources. Lots of resources in North Carolina and nationwide, actually, for people who are coping with illness and death in a pet. And then what we do for ourselves, folks, because this is a heavy lift. The emotional labor is a heavy lift. Is try to correct when you can for the negativity bias, which is inherent in every human brain. We always focus on what doesn't feel good, what didn't go well, the people who are upset, the people we didn't please today, the people who hate us, all the ways we've fallen short or we perceive we've fallen short. That is where our brains automatically go. So we have brains that have Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for good ones. The good stuff rolls right off. So we have to correct for this. And one of the best tips I ever received from a mentor of mine many years ago was, in these difficult situations, can you identify at least one thing that went well? Even if it was, I didn't lose my cool. Even if it was, I remembered to do a couple of things and I did the best I could. And at least they weren't happy when they left, but they weren't swearing at me anymore, right? So this isn't sort of the silver lining stuff, but it is sort of, can we balance out the negativity in our own brains just because it helps us to regulate if we can do that? Correct for the toxicity as well, okay? So these kinds of really challenging dynamics tend to have a high degree of toxicity and emotional contagion. What we need to do ourselves as individuals is discharge that energy somehow. So breathing really intentionally. This is when doing straw breathing, multiple rounds. When you get off that phone or you finally get a situation resolved to the best of your ability, breathe, breathe, breathe. Try to shed some of that if you can move. That is a good time to run to the restroom if you can. It is a good time to get a sip of water. Ice water is really good for neural regulation and emotional regulation. So moving, breathing, drinking water, really good. Correct for rumination. Don't let yourself stew and brew after a really difficult case or really difficult day, or in particular, a really horrible week. Limit your worry time. Often what I'll say to folks is, please limit your worry time to the amount of time you're in the car on your commute. You are allowed to think about it and stew and brew while you're driving. And the moment you pull in at home, have some sort of closing ritual to change the channel in your own brain and start thinking about something else. Think about all of the other things in your life that are good, that require your energy, that deserve it, including yourself. Correct for the brain freeze. Our signals get scrambled too. Our bandwidth also runs low. So grabbing a quick snack, hydrating, and focusing on the present moment is critical after every case in the middle of a really busy work day. Find a way to help your body to regulate as best you can. That'll help your brain work more effectively so that you can build solutions case after case after case, okay? And then correcting for contagion. This is super important, folks, because I know that these negative experiences do not happen in a vacuum. Everybody knows when something's going wrong. Everyone can feel it. Most people can hear it on a team. Most people are chattering about it at the water cooler. We know this. And rehashing those details is of limited utility. So I often find it can be helpful to have a brief huddle after something really awful happens. You know, a client has been screaming at a bunch of people. You've had a really difficult event with a patient who's gone out downhill very quickly. It's been really traumatic. A brief huddle to sort of check in with each other, pause, and talk about processes and outcomes. This can be at the tail end of the day or at the end of a shift. Find a way to do it and make sure it's focusing on strengths, not just what's gone wrong. We don't want to spend lots of time talking about everything that's gone poorly. We want to say, what did we do well? What can we improve next time? What surprised us that we might want to try more of later? Okay. And then take your own pulse. Encourage everybody to take a deep breath. How are we all doing? Scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best ever, 1 being I'm barely upright right now. Where are we? And then what do we need to do? And encourage everybody to just pause and regulate. and then practice self-care and compassion, because you work really, really hard. And everything that you do is so critically important. The work that you do, not just for your patients, but the work that you do with and for your clients, never goes without being noticed. And so please make sure that you're taking really good care of yourselves and doing that first. Okay. And now we'll finish with questions. I've gone a couple minutes over. And so if people have to scoot, please feel free, but we'll stick around and take as many questions as we can.